Hi, church. Good morning. I would have loved to be there with you in person today, but as you can tell, most likely from my voice, I'm not feeling the greatest, and so I thought it was the wisest decision to stay home. And the beauty of technology allows me still to kind of share in this moment with you a little bit. I have no doubt that the morning so far has been meaningful and beautiful as you've had moments to sing together, to reflect through song, as you've had moments to hear about stories in the life of Jesus that testify to his faithfulness, that testify to Jesus as hope, being the one who is true, the one who is able to guide and lead and direct and knows what life is for and what a life is meant to look like in our lives. And for right now, I wanted to continue the theme with the Do You Remembers by asking you a question. Do you remember when Jesus on the cross said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing"? Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Before we begin to dissect that and look at it in more depth, let's allow ourselves to just embrace it, just straight on. With our imagination, we think of Jesus being surrounded by the people who called for his crucifixion. We think of Jesus being surrounded by people who implemented that crucifixion. And he's hanging on a cross. And on his left and his right are two criminals, representing that Jesus is viewed as a criminal, a rebel, one who is going against the will of the religious world and the societal world, the political world. And Jesus looks out and says, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." I wanted to pause here if we were in person and open it up for some participation, just to ask you, where do you find yourself? What starts bringing from the bottoms of yourself up to the top when you start thinking about this? What happens within you when you hear and you imagine and you picture these words and this image? Jesus saying, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." These words are recorded in the Gospel according to Luke. And Luke records these as some of Jesus's final words. And it's important for Luke. The idea that Jesus has a prayer as some of his final words, and a prayer on behalf of those who are causing him great harm, is important to Luke. It's not just important because it shows the character of Jesus, the fact that he is willing to practice what he has preached. But it's also important because it reveals an aspect of the biblical story being fulfilled in this moment, coming to realization in this moment. See, the Hebrew Bible, which you probably have heard as the Old Testament, has a book called the Book of Isaiah. And the Book of Isaiah is a book that was written over a long period of time and had many different contributors. And there are a ton of different themes within this book. There are themes such as pain and hurt and trouble and suffering as the book wrestles with the human condition of brokenness in the world. And there are also these glimmers of hope that are very present, that pop up throughout it, that make us vision a new world, make us think about a new future, a better future. And it also causes us to think of a new type of king, but let's not get ahead of ourselves yet. A part of this brokenness, and one of the key aspects of this brokenness within the book of Isaiah, is the fact that the religious leaders, the leaders of Israel, one by one failed at representing God to the people of Israel and failed to represent God to the nations around them. They did not lead with justice and mercy. They did not care for the poor and the oppressed and the widow. Instead, they exploited these people for their own gain. They continued to believe the lies of the other nations, even though God called them into something higher and more beautiful. And instead of encouraging and animating the people of Israel towards devotion to God and all that is good and right, they ended up stirring in the minds of the people of Israel and leading them towards believing in other gods and following other ways of life. And so again, one by one, they continually fail in this beautiful calling that God has on their life to lead this people to be a blessing to nations around them and to reveal to the world a way of life that is right, a way of life that as God intended it to be. And the climax of not only the book of Isaiah, but also the story of Israel is when they are exiled to Babylon. The superpower Babylon comes in and kicks them out of their home, their safe place, their sacred space. They kick them out and they are exiled, and people are in despair and distraught. It is so hard. Now, the book of Isaiah is sort of birthed out of this time period, reflecting on the tragedies of the leaders and sitting in this time of exile. And in the midst of this really difficult season, this really challenging time, we start to see these poems being formed in the book of Isaiah. These poems that picture for us, that vision cast for us, that project for us a new world, a new future, and a new king. And it's fascinating because as these poems start to be formed and as these prophets start to think of a new world and a new leader, they paint a picture of this leader that's very different and very odd. They paint a picture of this leader who will lead the people of Israel and finally represent God to the people and to the nations. But it's not your traditional leader. Your traditional leader of old would have been a warrior king who would come in with the power and the might of God to deliver and rescue and redeem the situation with military might. But this leader is unique. This leader is one who is actually looking a lot more like a servant king. It's described that nothing would draw our attention to this person. When we looked at this person, this leader, we would say, that isn't someone who would lead well. I don't know if I trust this guy over here. And we're told that instead of using military might to deliver the people, that he would actually suffer and die. That in the dying, in the suffering, that there would be this release, this healing, this entrance into the new redeemed world. And in one of the poems, there is this phrase, there is this section that says this. It is said that this servant king will be counted as a transgressor and will pray on behalf, will intercede on behalf of transgressors. And this is what Luke wants us to bring to mind as we see Jesus and as we hear Jesus pray on the cross on behalf of those who have hurt him. Quick poll before we kind of break down the idea of transgressor. When was the last time you used the word transgressor? Was it a month ago, a week ago, a couple of days ago? never, maybe. And I mean, I can't see you, so hopefully you're just looking around the room at each other and kind of gauging what it looks like in the room right now. My guess is that probably you haven't used the word transgressor or transgress or transgression, maybe ever in your life outside of perhaps reading something in the Bible, which I know is surprising because you think of, the opportunities that you would have to use this at like a ballet recital or, a dinner party, but that's okay. So your homework is to somehow work the word transgression into a conversation this week. I hope that you're up for that. Now, in order to use that word, of course, you're going to have to know the context behind that word. And so in the Hebrew, the word transgression is the word pesha. And that's the noun, and the verb is pasha. And what it's speaking to is a breaking, a betrayal of trust. So if there is somebody that you trust and they do something like lie or steal, and they betray your trust, that is pesha. It's this deeply relational term, and it's important for Luke, and it's important for the biblical story. Now, what's fascinating is that the Hebrew authors, they look at the world in a very unique way. Whereas you might think, pesha, that is only something that can happen between people who know each other, make sense, relational terms, so between like a father and a son or between neighbors. But for the biblical authors, there's this underlying belief that we are all connected, that we all know each other in a sense, that we have this relational fusion. And they believe this because we are all created in the image of God. So for the biblical authors, every single person is unified in their infinite worth and value being created in the image of God. And so to pesha, even if you don't know the person, because of the infinite worth that every single person has, it's as if you're going against that infinite connectedness, that worth, and you are betraying their trust. It does stretch the mind a little bit, but again, it's trying to bring into play this idea that we are all relationally connected, that the person on your left, on your right, even if you've never met them before, is deeply connected to your story, and you are deeply connected to their story. And so for the biblical authors, if two individuals don't know each other and they betray each other, they fight, they argue, they steal, it is an act of pesha. What we've seen Russia do in Ukraine in an invasion is an act of pesha. If we look out in the history of our world and see the systemic injustice against Black individuals, against our indigenous friends, that is a systemic understanding, a systemic act of pesha. Because it violates, it devalues the interconnected relationship that we all have being image bearers of the divine. And so in Jesus and in the suffering servant, we see one who cries out, who prays for the world, knowing that there is this cycle of transgression, this cycle of betrayal. And Jesus, he looks at these people in front of him, those who have participated in his crucifixion, those who have called for it, and he sees people who are not getting it. They don't understand the reality of this interconnectedness. They don't understand the reality of of this betrayal of trust. But here's the key part, that as Jesus is being betrayed, as people are violating his worth, his infinite value as an image bearer of the divine, Jesus does not betray them. He remains true. He remains the one who is faithful and right. He is the one who looks upon them and does not violate, does not lash back out against their infinite worth. It stops at him. He remains faithful and compassionate and empathetic to the world. And so we see in this prayer, Father, forgive them, this beautiful submission to the way that God has formed the world and created everyone to have a beautiful and pristine value. What I'm also so grateful for is the end of the prayer. For they do not know what they are doing. And it always struck me, what's going on there? And as I started getting older, which I know maybe a laugh for some of you being 30, but as I've been able to sit with people as a friend, as a pastor, as a family member, and walk through some hard times and have discussions with them about areas of their past that are affecting their future, whether they are aware of it or not. Maybe it's a betrayal of trust that they experienced as a childhood that has formed them in such a way that it's affecting them in their past or their present. Or maybe it's something that happened generations ago that is happening or affecting them in their present now. It's fascinating how I can, with my limited understanding, begin to connect the dots and say, like that's affecting you this betrayal, this act of brokenness is affecting you in this way and has changed your story for the negative in this way. Wow, this is so hard. And I start growing in empathy. If I can grow in empathy, how much more does the God who knows how all of the story, the web of brokenness has affected this one individual in this one situation, how much more empathy does he have? And so Jesus on the cross, I think, is speaking over us the fact that he understands the complexity of human brokenness in the world. He understands our human condition. He understands how transgressions have these betrayals, have wreaked havoc on our story. And he offers forgiveness. And he offers faithfulness. And he offers to be a new leader, a leader that would represent God well to us and for us. But he would not just be a leader that leads us well, but that he would be one who gives us a new start. He would be one who brings healing and wholeness to those acts of betrayal because he is the one who is trustworthy and faithful. And so we can sit with him in our moments of brokenness and we can allow him to bring healing and wholeness to our lives because he gets it. He understands. He sees you. He sees me. He sees the complexity of all of the moments in our life where we want to be anybody but ourselves because of how fractured we feel. And he understands, and he offers forgiveness, and he offers hope, and he testifies to a new way of life, very different than the one that we are used to. And church, we need this. We need these moments of reflection. We need these moments of time where we just sit in that truth and we allow it to heal us and to form us. And so we are going to take an opportunity now to take the Lord's Supper or communion or the Eucharist. There's all these different names for it, but what it is, it's this way of engaging our senses through holding elements of bread and, well, in our case, grape juice. and we reflect on the moment where Jesus said that this bread represents my body, and this cup, this wine back then for him represents his blood, his life given for us to communicate that he is the one who will lead us to a new way of life if we trust him. If we trust him. The Apostle Paul says this, "For I received from the Lord what I also passed on to you. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, 'This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me.' In the same way, after supper, he took the cup, saying, 'This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this whenever you drink it in remembrance of me. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes.'" Let's take a moment. If you have not had an opportunity to go and get a communion cup, you can do that now. For all of us, we can open up our little packages. And I would invite you to take out your bread and to hold the cup and to spend a few minutes in reflection, to spend a few minutes reflecting on the various do you remembers that we have looked at this morning, reflecting on the songs that have been sung, and allow it as an opportunity to be present with the one who is faithful, with the one who knows and sees you, and not just knows and sees you in your brokenness and the effects of pesha, the effects of betrayal in your own life, but knows you as one who can be so much more and not defined by those instances. That is a great gift. Let's take a moment of reflection